so among the gentlemen who were in your audience, and they need to recognize that inherently they are good men, and and if that first grand cycle of life has been one that has had some difficulties, maybe great difficulties, be patient with yourself, uh, because I really like the terminology that you use about the seasons in life. It really appeals to the side of me that's really big on the grand cycles of the cosmos, the cycles of the planets, for example. But it also seems to be very much reflected in an individual's life.
Welcome to The Climb, where I help Christian men live fully, lead boldly, and leave a legacy that matters. I'm your host, Teko Bailey, husband, father, life coach, and your guide in the climb. Whether you're navigating fatherhood, building a business, or simply longing to live more purpose, this is the space to rise.
In some ways, I guess you could say you've lived many lives, but I think that's a great thing, and it's clear that you're not opposed to changes and navigating different seasons. But welcome to The Climb, John. It's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you very much, Takeo. It's wonderful to be together with you this morning. It's a beautiful, bright, and sunshiny morning. And yes, if we wanted to explore a little bit of that background, when you talk about the seasons of life, there's no question that when I look back over this almost 66 years now, which is a lot of laps around the sun, uh, there uh, there are times in an individual's life where you almost seem to have completed some sort of a grand cycle in life. And then you begin to realize that there are inner stirrings within you uh, that are the early. I guess we could describe it as the early suggestions of new energies that are going to be coming your way, and some of those can actually be quite dramatic.
Yes.
And 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 not only do we have seasons in life, sometimes there are um, certain pathways that are going on simultaneously in a person's life. And so from my perspective, takeaway, I tend to see those large grand cycles in life. My name is John Murray. I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, in Canada. I've recently retired from a lengthy teaching career, beginning back in the late 1980s. Began as a high school science and mathematics teacher. Eventually, that morphed, as it were, into an academic life in Canadian universities, and then ultimately finished the most recent 10 years both in a college of pharmacy as well as in our medical school here at the University of Manitoba. Fairly reluctant to retire completely, Takeo, from the mainstream. So I decided to maintain an appointment at the med school so I could stay involved with a few very important longer term research programs. But my teaching life at that level has now come to an end, and that frees up a lot more time, including time, as I will discover when we get to the spring, to become a grandparent for the first time.
Wow, congrats. That's definitely a new season to venture into, and I'm sure there'll be a lot that you'll experience in that season. But you've lived several lifetimes in one, I would say, as a geologist to an educator, as you've talked about a little bit in the medical research, and also as a musician. What have you learned about adapting to change without losing your sense of purpose or identity?
Uh, Maybe in my case, Tagle, this might seem uh, almost comedic at times. I only spend about 5 or 6 years deeply involved in a particular facet in life, and then I become restless. And so I have a real agent of change that rather regularly comes into life. sometimes those are circumstances that are thrust upon us by our living conditions and where we live and family situations. But professionally, I have always really enjoyed diversity from the time I was very, very young. So it was difficult for me to actually select some kind of a career path. And what tends to happen oftentimes, particularly when we're younger, we tend to do a lot of listening about our future among the authority figures that we have either a great deal of admiration for, maybe a certain element of fear of them and what they're capable of accomplishing, and thirdly, those whom we love. And and so there, I've come to the realization, I think, Teko, that there are really no great errors and great mistakes in life. Uh, but in this grand cycle of life, we learn many, many lessons. And as time goes by, as the decades go by, we tend to be increasingly humbled by what has occurred to us, and 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 that's the remarkable thing for me. It may sound trite, it may sound very, very traditional, but as these various career paths have come and gone, not only have I learned to adapt to very, very new circumstances, sometimes you also have to break through some of those fear factors about whether you're really good enough to
Yeah.
be doing what you're doing. So that whole notion of continually building one's confidence, and there are key moments in an individual's life where our confidence can be shaken, and sometimes shaken quite dramatically, right to one's foundations.
If as you talk about that confidence being shaken, let's take us back a little bit. Maybe say in the earlier years, where did this love for academics begin, and how did you navigate maybe that earlier part of the journey?
That's an excellent question because I grew up in a pretty rough neighborhood in a city in eastern Canada. It was a neighborhood that was replete with underachieving individuals. There was a lot of criminal intent, even amongst the young people. The streets were tough, and for me, being not of that kind of archetype, uh, I felt rather alone and rather isolated, even in my neighborhood and amongst my family members, uh, because my thinking always seemed to be in a very, very different place. I was very bookish as a young kid. I pretty much lived in libraries. That was my escape uh,
Yeah,
that was my escape, as it were, from sometimes the dreariness of neighborhood life. The whole notion of going on to advanced education beyond high school was virtually unknown in my neighborhood. Uh, it was virtually unknown in my own family, with the exception of those who entered religious life. They were the only ones in my family background who had the good fortune of being able to be schooled, and perhaps even schooled to a very, very high level. Uh, I knew that I was going to have to do it all on my own,
yeah,
both financially and otherwise. So I left home at age 19, ostensibly to not only pursue more personal freedom, but I also knew that if I was going to achieve uh, some of those academic dreams, I had to get out of that neighborhood. And because it was a place that was just really going to possibly pull an individual back and
absolutely.
pull them down to a certain level.
Yeah,
And that I was very, very uncomfortable with. So um, my growing up years were, as is typical of many, were about trying to find a place where I could belong. But I've never ever ended up feeling a sense of belonging anywhere that I've gone in life. It's really quite curious. Some might describe that as, perhaps John's not a team player. Maybe he has a certain social awkwardness, which is probably true. Um, being the science student, as it were, of the neighborhood, sometimes my young friends would even tease me a little bit and ask things like, "Hey, Johnny, um, why don't you give us one of those big words that you like to use?" and and I it wasn't about trying to impress
yeah.
the kids in the neighborhood, that was just the kind of kid that I was.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed advanced levels of thinking, and it's hard to say where that might have come from, but my real joy was to bury myself in learning and in knowledge.
You know, it can be difficult finding your place when the people who you're looking for that values the things that you value aren't quite in that environment. And I can imagine just the journey that you went on to kind of uh, find some of those spaces and places. Uh, in your background, there's music, there's a bunch of other things. What kind of helped you to transition into places that you felt like you fit in? And maybe what were some of the challenges in those seasons that you faced to push through the barriers, so to speak, as
Mhm.
you searched for those communities?
Again, an excellent question, and you when we had some preliminary discussions, you were mentioning things like turning points, and
Yes.
this is a really good week to talk about one of those turning points in a very young life. I realize that there's many decades to consider here, but just this week, the elementary school that I went to was torn down, and it was built in the early 1960s. It was a neighborhood school. It was actually attached to the Catholic cathedral in my hometown of London, Ontario. Uh, One of those first great turning points was when I was only 10 years old, and there was a remarkable music program that was founded at this school. And the intent was to draw young kids from all parts of the city, irrespective of their socioeconomic circumstances, whether they had even had any kind of exposure to music. And we just simply had passed some sort of a curious audio test with headphones on when we were in grade 4. And lo and behold, both my brother and I, we were born in the same year, but we're not twins.
Yeah.
So what what used to be known as Irish twins, I was January and my brother was December. And so we were always in the same grade at school. Well, as it turned out, we both got an invitation to come to this music school. Well, we were terrified. We cried, and particularly to mom. Mom, we don't want to go. We don't want to leave our neighborhood friends and so on.
Yeah.
And so my mom had always nurtured a lifelong interest in music herself. She was never professionally trained, but she had a gorgeous alto voice. And she even told us many times that she sang to us when we were in utero, even before we were born.
Wow.
So a marvelous point there. So we show up in 1970 as 10-year-olds at this new school. Everybody in the classes knew. Half of them were in tears because they had left their neighborhoods. Uh, but with but within a week, Takeo, we're coming home with our first stringed instruments, and we were so enthusiastic. We opened up, in my brother's case, a violin, which he's still playing today, and myself, I had a viola, and we started playing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star right on the doorstep when we got home. And
Wow.
so, within a week, we fell in love with this place, and so that began an 11-year formal education in a wide variety of music. So there was string music, there was orchestral music, there was jazz, there was band, and there was choral music. About 30% of every school day was spent in the music rooms, Takeo. And so the academic side of things was very much compressed. So you had to be a fairly able student, but you also had to have an aptitude for music. Uh,
Yes.
Most of us in that class would have never had the financial resources to have something like piano lessons, for example, or guitar lessons. It just simply wasn't something that was going to happen. So we had this wonderful opportunity, and that was absolutely a watershed experience, Takeo. And when I look back, uh, that was a really crucial point in time. And so, having a mother who understood the value of music training and being able to get it at no cost through one's schooling, um, So that strong parental support was very, very important in that journey. And then simultaneously to that, uh, my father, a wonderful, kind, and gentle individual, but terribly addicted. So I also grew up in an alcoholic household, and it was generational. And so there for me was in the midst of some of those joys, there is also rather the sadness and the murkiness and the disappointment of feeling as though my father wasn't the strong man that he should be.
Yeah.
That set me almost on a course, Takeo, where throughout life I was always searching for a father figure, and I rarely ever found it. I rarely ever found it. So among the gentlemen that you speak to, if there's one thing that's just so terribly crucial,
Yes.
is that if you have entered upon fatherhood, it is incumbent upon you to be the best damn father you possibly can be.
Come
Uh,
on.
because things like alcohol can, it destroys good people. And that was the case with my dad. And by the time I was age 25, my dad was gone.
Wow.
And
Uh,
that was the next great turning point. I was just absolutely devastated. Even though he wasn't a well man for many, many years, he had a host of chronic illnesses in addition to his alcohol struggles. So he lived a very short life.
I think a lot of men, self included, at different seasons in our lives, we realize that our fathers aren't necessarily equipped with everything that we need from them. And I think in those moments, we realize, okay, I need a mentor or I need a coach or searching for that father figure. I think for me, it wasn't so much that my dad wasn't around. He was around, and he was very present and active and so forth. But there were gaps that I felt like um I needed to learn more from him about different areas of life, different areas of manhood, and so forth. And while he did his best, I think just learning a little bit more about his journey and his story, where his dad passed away when he was younger, I realized as I get older, he wasn't equipped with some of the tools or resources to be everything that I hoped he would be as a dad. And while I still celebrate him, I realize there were those gaps and missing pieces. And you're right, a lot of men, we go through these seasons and phases with our dads where they're either present or not present, and the impact that it has on our lives, it's very deep. Some of it we haven't even fully explored or processed to see how we can become better fathers. How would you say you navigated that journey as you looked for a father figure that didn't quite show up, or maybe not in the way that you were hoping to find one?
It it was a search not only for mentorship, but it was also a search for what was probably a kind of idealized vision of fatherhood, and an idealization of, for example, the father son or the father children relationship. When you're young, we simply cannot appreciate the sophistication of how these relationships ebb and flow. I was more fortunate than some of my younger siblings, Takeo, because I got to see and be with my dad during the years when he was still relatively healthy.
Yes.
But my younger siblings never really saw that physically vigorous, healthy dad. Uh, from about the time I was 12 or 13 years old, that was where the steep decline in his health occurred. The real crisis point for me, Takeo, was when I was 12 years old, and my dad had to leave his job, which was a very good job, and he had to go to a psychiatric hospital to be treated. Uh, I must have tried to purge a lot of those memories because it wasn't until many, many years later that my mom described for me the effect that seemed to have on me. Uh, I was the only one of my siblings who went with my mom when we had to drive about an hour and a half to this rather isolated, almost idyllic setting
Yeah.
where this hospital was. But when I saw this place and I saw the men who were inside this facility, it was heartbreaking, Takeo, that my dad had to go to a place like this. I looked around and I looked at the condition of all of these other men, and
Yeah.
it essentially looked like an institution of failed human beings.
Hmm.
And and as it turned out, I was the only one of my siblings who never talked to my dad on the phone. I never wrote him a letter. Uh, I almost emotionally and perhaps practically cut myself off because I just simply couldn't deal with it.
Yeah.
I just simply couldn't deal with it. And so that may have been one of those key periods that even informed the next 10 years, because my teenage years were very turbulent. My early 20s, equally turbulent. Things didn't really start settling down until I was in my mid to late 20s. And from there, things began to develop in very, very positive ways. And I felt as though I was, as it were, making my way. Um, but there's an old term that comes from Newfoundland. My first wife was a Newfoundlander, and it's known as being a lag behind. And a lag behind was an individual like me, still looking at himself, 28 years of age, 29 years of age, and the wheels are still not turning properly to begin to really make something of one's life, especially professionally as well as personally. So the uh, the lag behind eventually, as it were, caught up in time, and things really began to change.
Well, I mean, clearly you while you might have been a lag behind, your academic achievements clearly states that you haven't stayed there for the rest of your life, because you've certainly established yourself in different areas. Do you find that your experience pushed you toward academic excellence as a way of overcoming some of those pain, and if so, what would you say in regards to that?
I would probably say that now this may not necessarily be wholly true, but for me, academic life was a kind of pantheon where I could escape.
Yes.
Uh, in other words, the longer I stayed in advanced study, uh, the more I was, in a sense, protected from the rigors of the world that was waiting for something more practical to be
Yeah.
done within the larger society. So I remained in formal academic study right up until my early 40s. Now, I had already started a teaching career at age 32, but most people begin to start their first full-time work, if you will, in their early 20s. Uh,
Yes.
Not in my case. I did not have a solid career trajectory type of employment until I was 32 years of age. So one message that I could certainly send out to many of those in your sphere, Takeo, is don't be overly concerned about the chronology in life. Uh,
Yes.
that for some people, it's just going to take a little bit more time. And I sometimes like to joke about the fact that I didn't want to peak too early because it might be better to peak a little bit later on in life.
Yeah.
But that was just the way things went. And um, as a younger lad, there were two things that I was good at: golf and school.
Come on.
Yeah, and at one point, actually, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a professional golfer. Like around 16, 17 years of age, I remember coming home and announcing to mom and dad that I was going to go to the RCGA golf school after I was finished high school. And that was a golf school where you don't train to become a touring pro, as it were, but you train to become a club level pro.
Yes.
So I would have liked the teaching aspect of things. I really enjoyed, I think I enjoyed country club life because I had been passionate about golf from the time I was 11. And But my mom stepped up yet again and said something to the effect that no son of mine is going to be living his life as a playboy on a golf course. No,
Uh,
the
uh,
dream is shattered.
oh no.
At that point in time, and when I looked at the life of the club pros, it actually looked really attractive.
Yeah.
It actually looked
I
really
bet
attractive.
you.
There wasn't a lot of pressure there.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of pressure. So thankfully, I guess I have to admit, thankfully, the fact that academic life was always such a joy, and it still is for me. Um, that was how things really began to work in a positive manner, because I discovered that the opening of doors
Yes.
can be really tremendous once you have found that thing or that pathway that not only really excites you,
Yes.
but those around you become inspired by the success that they will see you have. And when we talk about those doors opening, sometimes it can be just an ideal timing. And so in my case, pursuing advanced study not only extracted me from what would have been a much more pedestrian and banal existence, such as many of my neighborhood friends that I grew up with, some of whom are long dead
Yes.
uh, from their behaviors and from their addictions and so on. Uh, I never really thought of it as a way out. Um, but I think it's important for us to recognize that when there's something that really is fulfilling, even if it might not seem to be something that you're going to be able to earn a tremendous living at financially, doing something that you really love to do is so terribly important. And here's where the music side of things still is very fulfilling. I often speculate, Takeo, should I have gone on to advanced study in music and
Yes.
taking the playing of the cello to another level? That's one of those untrodden paths in life that I sometimes speculate. What might have happened had I decided to go in the direction of what seemed to be my real two loves when I was in my early 20s, and that was
Yeah.
literature and music. Well, where did I go? I went over here into the sciences and into something else that I also very much loved. So sometimes it can be difficult to decide where that pathway is going to be. So
Well, I think when you're a gifted person like yourself, and you find that whatever you put your mind to, you excel at it, that can sometimes be difficult, because I think, and we will never know for sure, but I would say even if you did go to the cello, you would have had good success, I believe, because you have the aptitude to put your mind to something and research it deeply. I mean, you have a PhD in, is it
it's
geoscience?
it's in the history and philosophy of science.
Yes. So clearly you have a mind that wants to explore things and search it out deeper. And, as a late bloomer, you wouldn't have known as much as you now do about yourself back then. But I think if cello were the choice that you went with, who knows, you'd be maybe neck to neck with Yo-Yo Ma.
I think I would have been a very, very amateur level cellist, Takeo, and
Yeah.
I probably would have been a school music teacher. And when I saw the kinds of things that our music teachers went through, I thought to myself, no, no, no,
Yeah.
that just doesn't seem right.
Well,
A moment ago, I was actually glancing up at the parchments on the wall, because periodically I need to be reminded of things. And advanced study always carries with it. Uh, there's essentially three words that almost appear on all of these parchments, and it talks about the privileges that will accrue to you. It talks about the obligations that advanced study provides for your role in society. And in addition to that, those privileges and those obligations, there's also a duty to service.
Yes.
So that even though one may be cultivating something that seems to be primarily in the realm of the mind, there is still this responsibility. And you talked about giftedness. There's a responsibility to make good use of those gifts, and to see where they can be best used in the role of service.
Yes.
I think that's terribly important, and it may take us a good number of years to fully lay the foundations of a life of service.
It will. John, if we segue a little bit back into fatherhood, I wanted to pick up, especially for the men who are listening to this, while they might not have the best role models and becoming fathers themselves, what words of encouragement could you give to them as they are either early dads, new dads, or maybe, midway, whether it's in the teenage years or whatever? Um, how would you speak to these men, and how did you navigate some of that?
I'm going to use life's most difficult circumstance to maybe illustrate that, Teko, to the gentleman there who may be among your viewers, and that was the failure of my first marriage. Uh, if there is truly a definition of a living hell,
Yeah.
it's divorce. And in 2008, when I realized, and I had to realize this fully, that I was so utterly unhappy, so utterly restrained uh, in my first marriage, I liken it to a flower bud that was held in stasis and was never permitted to bloom.
Hmm.
I was under great levels of almost imperceptible control, and it reached a crisis point in early 2008. And so I asked my then wife, can I leave and go on a journey of discovery to find out whether I can endure in this marriage or not?
Yeah.
And if I come back, I will stay. And if I don't come back, I never will. And so very, very quickly, and it was almost spectacular in its level of selfishness. This to me seemed like just about the most self-centered thing that a man could do. Not only abandon his wife of 15 years, but abandon his three children who were aged 9 through 12 at the time. Uh, most tend to kind of push through a steadily failing relationship like that until the kids are old enough, if
Yes.
if we could put that in quotation marks.
Yes.
Well, I had an individual whose wisdom I admired tell me that, John, that's probably the worst thing that you could do to your children, is to live a lie. And once they have all left home, you finally turn around and they discover that you had left your wife a long, long time ago, but you stay. And so this was a very, very important and almost existential crisis. Do I stay or do I go? Well, as it turned out, during that period of separation, I met the woman of my dreams, uh, who I am now married to. And as it turned out, we had met many, many years earlier when we were both in our early 20s in Daytona Beach, Florida.
Wow.
I was there on spring break with my buddies from university. Christina was there with her sister celebrating her 20th birthday. I was 23. And I remember meeting her in a nightclub. And I was so painfully shy and awkward, Takeo, that I couldn't even so much as invite her to share a drink or to hit the dance floor.
Yes.
I didn't see her again for 25 years.
Wow.
And then quite suddenly, she reappeared in my life, but I didn't know that it was the same person until she went to a photo album and pulled out a couple of pictures that she had from her trip to Florida that year, and I just kind of sat back in my chair and I looked at her and I said, "Oh my goodness, we actually met. This is the woman that I met. I can
Whoa.
tell by what you're wearing and the hair and everything. You know, the early 1980s big hair. You know,
Yeah.
and so I had these three beautiful young kids, and you know, they're in the weeks right after leaving Teko, it was as though I was walking steadily along a precipice and looking down at thousands of meters of some kind of an abyss, and wondering whether I was just simply going to fall in and ruin everything.
Hmm.
Well, as it turned out, this was the big fork in the road for me, and and I wouldn't describe it as something courageous. It was something that simply had to happen.
Yeah.
So everything that I had aspired and hoped to become had been waiting in stasis. I needed to be with a lover who was going to share in those dreams, and that there would be a mutual support of one another, and and that changed everything. So now, since approximately 2008, when we first started dating, and then we were married in late 2012. And so here you got two individuals who both had left difficult marriage circumstances, and we managed to knit ourselves together. And so now we have enlarged to have five wonderful children. So
Come on. Come on.
we have five kids between the ages of 27 and 33. And the three from my first marriage are right in that mix. They all get along. Two of the daughters are about to become mothers in April and May of next year.
Wow.
So this is just all so remarkable. Uh, I needed to take that opportunity when I was 23 years old to well up enough courage to go and
Yes.
introduce myself to this delightful young lady. And I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I was just so painfully shy. And so yes, that is one of those great internal battles that had to be worked through. And you know, these things don't happen overnight. It takes years for an individual to realize that they're probably not in an optimal situation in terms of their
Yes.
relationship. But you're married and you have children, so you ask yourself, well, to whom shall I go? You know, I can't abandon these little ones. And
Is there anything that you would encourage men to do as they think of searching for a suitable spouse? What are some steps one could take to prevent heading in this direction or navigating those seasons better so that they wouldn't have to end up making such harsh decision or even falling into the precipice as you
mhm,
spoke of, because it must have been a very uh, painful and rigorous season to navigate all of that with kids in the midst of it, and then feeling at peace or giving yourself the grace to move on if you feel like that's what you needed to do. How do we help men to either choose wisely before heading into this direction or preparing themselves better before, because I think sometimes we're just not prepared before we enter into marriage.
mhm. I think I may have some wisdom to share on this. And I wasn't a young man when I married. I was 32 years of age. Now that might have been a part of the lag behind phenomenon. Who knows? But I think I can share some things that I have certainly now come to recognize. And among these are during the dating phase in a relationship, um, a man needs to recognize and pay close attention to any and all red flags that pop up. Not only red flags within themselves, but a red flag that exists with the love interest.
Yes.
So, for example, to marry or enter upon a relationship in order to please all of the other family members around you is a
Mm,
mistake. That's what I did. Uh, so if you hear people say, "Oh, but this individual will be so good for you," uh, think of what a man you can become if you become connected to this person. Um, so that that element of relationship leading to self improvement and fulfilling one's destiny, it can't come from without. It has to come from within. So if there is any prospect of personality disorder, if there are addiction concerns, if there are lifestyle concerns, and so on and so forth, if a man senses any of these things, not only within himself, but in the beloved, you may have to enter upon a very, very difficult decision to say, no, at this time
Yes.
of life, it's better for me to remain single
Yeah.
because going down this road may be problematic. Um, so that's one element. Uh, Another important thing is that a relationship should almost through natural means turn a man into one who gives and gives generously to the other. So if a man were to sense that he's more self-indulgent or more self-interested or likes to draw the good things from a relationship to himself rather than it be shared more mutually, that's something that needs to be paid attention to.
Yeah.
So in a certain sense, Teko, we may have to have a very, very critical eye, even within ourselves. You know, the whole Shakespearean notion of first and foremost, unto thine own self be true. At my wedding rehearsal, the night before my first wedding, I turned to my brother, who was my best man, and I said to him, Paul, I don't feel comfortable about this. And he goes, Johnny, um, you're getting married tomorrow. Everybody has flown in from all over the place here. You, you got to go ahead.
Wow.
But even then, Takeo, there was something that was nagging at me that
Yeah.
that somehow didn't feel right. Uh, But when I look at the fact that there were three lovely children that came from this marriage, and my first wife is a marvelous woman. She's been an absolutely outstanding and a spectacular mother to the children. But relationship wise, it was very, very difficult for me. I was just steadily eroding away and losing myself. And that can't happen.
Yeah.
So in terms of walking along the precipice, and here's a kernel that really helped me realize that as difficult as it was, I have to keep putting one foot in front of the other on this path. When I left that marriage in the first days after that, Takeo, I had the same feeling of being uplifted, of exuberance, and almost walking about 6 or 12 inches off of the floor. I had the same emotional feelings as I had when I saw the birth of my children.
Wow. Wow.
And and so when I look back on that, I think that that's really, really important. It was almost as though uh, the soul was saying even to the physical body and to the mind, thank God now you are free. Now go and do the things that you were meant to do in this life. And everything flowered after that take home.
Wow.
Everything flowered.
That's definitely an interesting journey. You know, we started off talking about growing up in um a challenging neighborhood and how you found uh interest and love through music and exposure, segue into academic excellence and the drive to explore and search things out and to its highest level, so to speak. And then into fatherhood, where we talk about some of the mishaps, some of the, um, let's say, decisions that you wish you had made differently. And this person as John, um in this season of life with so much experience, so much knowledge, and so much to give, especially as we talk about to whom much is given, much is expected. Um, Service
Yeah.
is is such a key part of life and how we build community and the rest of the world. uh, as a leader, how do you encourage others to serve, and whether it's in parenting or as in the academic world, or just in our jobs in general as humans, uh, what do you have to say to us as it relates to servanthood?
I have to confess that if there's any kind of role in life that I found very daunting, certainly more than at times frightening, it's leadership positions. Uh, I have almost preferentially avoided leadership positions because I always felt most comfortable and most contributory, if I can say, by being the wingman in the organization.
Yes.
Uh, I mentioned to my wife just yesterday that because she asked me about environments, and I reminded both of us what I really genuinely love doing is swimming in an ocean of ideas. So, because I don't naturally incline towards leadership, it's really important for me to be within organizations or within groups where there is a competent and strong leadership at the helm. It's not something that I really desire. Uh, Recently, as you would know, I have taken on a leadership role within the Philharmonic that we both sing with.
Yes.
Well, I was asked for as many as 2 or 3 years, lots of taps on the shoulder. John, would you consider this? Would you consider this? And I always kept kind of pushing it away. And I tended to rely upon the fact that, yes, I was very busy professionally, and I probably couldn't take on something like this. Well, something caused me, rather in a moment, to raise the hand and say, "Okay, I'm willing to serve."
It
But
is time.
my goodness, what a learning experience! Leadership, being the individual who has that sign on the desk that says "the buck stops here," or
Yes.
when you realize that you actually are the ultimate responsibility figure in an organization. This is not something that comes to me easy at all. And to reiterate, I steered away from anything administrative. I steered away from anything that would put me in the chair, as it were, uh, uh, leading others. Um, Maybe this is that whole personality profile of an individual who struggles in team settings. And so when I'm in a setting when I have to work with a team or with a committee or a group of individuals, that these are important challenges for us to take on if we have identified that this is something that we tend to keep aside in life or not really aspire to. And part of that mentorship experience is when others around you whom you admire actually seem to have faith in you. And
Yes.
we think that you would be really good at this. Why don't you give it a go? Sometimes you just might need that little nudge from among the people who are around you. So, and in those grand cycles, those grand seasons, I'm looking at the next 30 to 35 years now as yet again another grand cycle in life. I'm fully engaged and fully energized and inspired to be involved and serve in different ways for another 30 or 35 years until I'm a very, very old man.
Come on.
Yeah, yeah.
Come on.
Um, so among the gentlemen who were in your audience, and they need to recognize that inherently they are good men. And if that first grand cycle of life has been one that has had some difficulties, maybe great difficulties, be patient with yourself, uh, because I really like the terminology that you use about the seasons in life. It really appeals to the side of me that's really big on the grand cycles of the cosmos, the cycles of the planets, for example. but it also seems to be very much reflected in an individual's life. And recognizing that we live in a world where even the last 30 years of one's life can be the best,
Yes,
uh, that's something to look forward to. Life really is worth living, and
it is.
living to the fullest. And if at some point in one's life you feel as though you have absolutely hit the gutter and you've completely bottomed out, uh, that's when you want to relight that spark. And it's probably going to take some real supportive people around you to help you realize the value that we have, because we all have a mission, Takeo. We all have a purpose,
Absolutely. To
and finding that uh, sometimes takes longer for certain individuals than others.
it it does, which kind of leads me to my final question. Someone who is in that journey, whether we want to say they're a late bloomer or but they're seeking to tap into purpose, what how would you encourage them? Because sometimes we're fearful of trying something new or stepping outside of the box, for someone like yourself who at a later age you started seeing more of what you were capable of, what would you say to that person who is maybe a little bit afraid of stepping into something new or going through a new change or transition?
I would probably suggest, this wouldn't be advice, but I would probably suggest that periodically we feel something within ourselves that's encouraging us to actually seek our authentic identity in this life. We can spend a lot of years cultivating an identity that others see, but it may not, in fact, be who we actually are. Um, in 2015, I put the scissors away and I stopped cutting my hair. And so now it's only a little trim every so often. Well, I realized that until I had almost reached my retirement years, I couldn't grow my hair out because of professional obligations in the job profile that I had.
Yeah,
It was simply not considered appropriate and professional for a male
yeah,
to have a certain amount of a length of mane. Well, heavens, I realized even during the awkward stage of the growing out of the hair that I was not taking on a new identity. I
yeah.
was I was stripping away the layers of the falsehood,
Come on,
and I was becoming the individual who I always knew that I was, even physically.
come on.
Yes, yes, absolutely. From the time I was a teenager, I wanted to have long hair, and and whether it was parental obligations or whether it was societal views and so on great lengths of hair among men, heavens. Um, if this was the mid 18th century in Scotland, where my ancestors are from,
Yeah,
this is the way men would look.
absolutely. Isn't it interesting how society has these new laws or whatnot based on the age that we live in?
Oh yes, oh yes. So I guess to use that, and I don't see that as really a trite example, because this was a very dramatic change. So that
Yes.
when I bump into people who I might have known uh, 30, 35 or more years ago, um, they're astonished at the change. It's John. Well, what happened to you? Um, well, it was just simply a matter of discovering when I was in my mid 50s that this is who I am,
Yes.
and and so that whole, just circling back to that notion of having a self identity that is honest within oneself.
I think over the years, a lot of men have struggled with some of these things because they don't fit into that status quo, and therefore, sometimes made to feel less than, or even ostracized from certain groups of men. And I do agree with you. I think we're becoming more. I guess, aware or sensitive to some of those needs. Hence, even this month of November, considered as uh let's say November, where we talk about mental health and so forth. Like you're not allowed, or you weren't allowed to talk about anything mentally health related, because like you wouldn't be considered as a man or strong if you did. And so
Oh yeah,
that's being
oh
stripped
yes.
away, you know?
A good example of that is the hidden agony of the men who came home at the end of the Second World War. Uh,
Yes.
the, the in many cases, these men were completely forgotten
Yes.
by families, because the scourge of what we now call PTSD
Mm-hmm.
uh, was not something that was deemed appropriate for the soldier who was coming home victorious at the end of the war. Very few Canadians, for example, um, when you take a look at the casualties on the battlefield, there were 5 times as many casualties in terms of mental illness for the men who came home, and almost every city in Canada had a large post-war psychiatric hospital where the veterans were kept ostracized and kept hidden from the rest of society because
Wow.
these men could not cope when they
Wow.
came. The hero in them was an illusion. It
Yes.
had it had been dismantled. So we tucked these men away, and no one knew where they were. And uh, I should mention that one of my most important mentors, and the one who was a real kind of father figure and a real masculinist, was an old Catholic priest friend of mine, Father Joe. And his vocation as a priest was to spend his time with the veterans in the psychiatric hospitals. That was what he did in his priestly life. He was the Father Mulcahy from MASH during the Second World War. He was
Yes.
an army chaplain, tough as nails, smoked a pack of cigarettes unfiltered a day, right up into his 90s. He was a real character. This was one tough dude, but there was another side to him.
Yeah.
And it was that kind, that caring, that gentle soul. And I'll finish with this. He often said to me, John, many of the veterans, I would be cradling them in my arms as they're taking their last breath. And they would say to me, Father, you're the only friend I have.
Wow.
And so uh, that I think is a key for us to understand that there could be a price to be paid
Yes.
for the masculinist rise that we're currently seeing right now. And we need to work with certitude, and we need to be assertive in creating a real genuine model of manhood going further into the 21st century.
Well, thanks, John. But as we close off, just going back to vulnerability among men and some of the areas that we're still seeking to be healed in, uh, how do you encourage us as fathers, as men, as sons to tap more into that as we move forward?
I think maybe I could phrase it this way. The and the word that you've chosen is a good one. We need to understand what it is and what the gift is to be vulnerable. It comes from the Latin vulnere, which means to be wounded.
Hmm.
So vulnerability is to carry within ourselves the emotional, the psychological, and perhaps the spiritual woundedness that all human beings have. Quite often, it's very, very closely guarded and very much kept hidden by the manner in which men, as you had reminded us, the way men are taught from the time they are young boys to not reveal the vulnerableness that we might find within us. But I think the real gem here is that the only kind of individuals who can really become healers of others are those who not only have experienced woundedness in their own lives, but they may in fact still be carrying a certain amount of that woundedness within them, and they're still seeking to resolve as much of that as possible
Hmm.
in this grand journey in life. So let's embrace that vulnerability because it allows us to heal the other men who are around us.
So good. Well, thank you so much, John, for sharing with us today. And it's just been a pleasure having you here on The Climb.
It's been a marvelous experience. It's hard to imagine where the time has gone. Going forward, I would certainly appreciate even having future opportunities to speak to the men with whom you are working both virtually as well as visibly and practically, Teko. So congratulations on the work that you're doing. It's challenging, it's tough, and it's so terribly, terribly important.
Thank you.